October 4th, during our Feast of Tabernacles tour, an editorial ran in the Jerusalem Post that just stood me up straight. I have never read such a thing. I never imagined such a thing. We were so shocked, our crew, that we called the Post. We asked for permission to go down there with our cameras, interview the writer, and ask him, could he back up what he said? Is the evidence there? What he said was so stunning. We did that. He cooperated with us, and we had quite an interview, and I learned what cursing Israel can come to. Let me introduce to you a wonderful man, the writer David Bar-Ilan. You start, it's hardly surprising that Jerusalem's Anglican bishop, Samir Katifi, has decided to co-sponsor with a world Islamic organization a conference on the situation of Christians in this country. The move is consistent with the local church's growing involvement in the political drive for a Palestinian state.
Right. The churches have become activists politically, and I explained that at least partly. The explanation lies in the fact that they are threatened. They are afraid for their lives. Christians, the Arab Christians in this country, are a small minority, and it's getting smaller. And the reason it's getting smaller, they started leaving the countries when the Jordanians occupied what they call the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, and of course had control over the holy places in Jerusalem. And they did all sorts of things to make the Christians feel unwanted and as a persecuted minority. As such, they've taken on the coloration of their oppressors, the ones who tried to push them out. And that is why I think they're collaborating today. They are really afraid for their lives, and there have been many cases in which that fear was justified by the actions of the Intifada activists, as they are known, the terrorists who belong to the PLO or to the Hamas, to the Islamic fundamentalists.
I'll have to say that I am shocked at Christians being intimidated, falling back before threats.
Even the Pope, I don't know if you remember that, but during the Gulf crisis, the Pope actually came out for Saddam Hussein. He mentioned Saddam Hussein favorably in speeches 38 times and condemned the war against him, condemned the coalition against him. That was partly, again, because of the interests that the Christian churches, the established Christian churches, have in the Arab world. They have a lot of Arabs who are Christian in the Arab world. They are a small minority and they're persecuted. What I invade against, and I feel is absolutely horrible, is the fact that even those very established and powerful churches never condemned massacres of Christians in Arab countries because of this, because they're afraid that worse will happen if they do so. For instance, in Lebanon, Christians have been massacred right and left, as you know, now for 15, 20 years. In the Sudan, Christians are being annihilated, wiped out. And in many other places, in Egypt, the Copts are being persecuted and killed by Islamic fundamentalists. The police are doing very little about it. And the Christian churches, the established churches, are not protesting, are not saying this is wrong, this is terrible, and trying to get the Arab governments to do something about it.
But Christians are Christians because they read the Old Testament. The Old Testament tells us that the Messiah is a Jew.
Yes, and that is perhaps the greatest crime being committed here. In order to prove that they preceded the Jews in this country, the Arabs are now claiming that the Palestinians are really the descendants of an ancient people that used to live here, like the Philistines, the Canaanites. They're also claiming the Christian Arabs, again under the pressure of the PLO and the fundamentalist Islam, are claiming ancestry to the followers of Jesus Christ, which of course makes it absolutely ridiculous, because as we all know, not only was Jesus a Jew, he was born in Bethlehem in Judea, as it says in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. And as you probably know, Palestine is never mentioned in the New Testament.
Well, nevertheless, he was born 6 centuries before Muhammad was born.
Before Muhammad
how
was
could
born,
they go back to somebody before their...
That is how absurd it it is. It is absolutely ridiculous, and nevertheless they push the line in the hope that what Hitler and Goebbels used to say, that if you repeat a lie often enough, and if it's big enough, and you repeat it often enough, it will be accepted as the truth. They keep referring to Jesus as a Palestinian. They refer to Peter as a Palestinian. They refer to the early Christians as the ancestors of the present Arab population of this country. Of course, it makes it absolutely ridiculous. And nevertheless, these repetitions are effective. Even reference books today refer to this country as Palestine in the time of Christ, which of course is ridiculous.
Yeah,
it wasn't Palestine, it was Israel, it was Judea.
As you wrote here, the campaign began a decade or so ago when the PLO embarked on an attempt, I love this, to de-Judaize Jesus and Palestinize him.
Right. Right, that's exactly what's been happening. And
change Jesus Christ to an Arab.
Right, an Arab, a Palestinian, a whatever. And the strangest thing is to claim that the Arabs of this country, most of whom, by the way, arrived here less than a century ago as a result of the Zionist movement, which created working places.
It was the Jews who made the Arabs to come.
But even those who had lived in this country for a long time cannot obviously trace their ancestry to the Jews who followed Jesus 2,000 years ago.
The whole thing is absolutely shocking. Of course, David's referring to the 4 or 5 established churches represented around the holy sites of Israel. He doesn't mean every church in the world, and certainly not. Does every denomination side with Muslims against Jews and so on? Most have no interest in it. Still in all, the very idea that people, even Christian in name, could team up with pagans against the brethren of the Lord was amazing to me. Evidently, Muslims climbed the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, unquestionably Christianity's holiest site. They painted a PLO flag, right. And in your view, the church didn't even protest.
No, they didn't protest. They didn't mention it, and they didn't ask it to be ask that it be erased because they were so afraid of the terrorists who did it. And as I say, it's very difficult to blame people for being afraid for their lives, but this is a fact, and this happened around the time that everybody was yelling about the Jewish purchasers of a hostel, which was an abandoned pigsty that was bought by a drug addict haven, which was bought by Jews and inhabited by families, and that became a huge furor, as you remember, a couple of years ago, when this was being done to one of the holiest places of Christianity, and nobody protested.
And then there was a remarkable sign on the east side of Jerusalem, which I have here. It was written in Arabic, but it's translated to the German. Sabbat töten wir die Juden, am Sonntag töten wir die Christen. Will you translate that for me?
Yes, on Saturday the Jews will die, on Sunday the Christians will die.
Each on their appropriate Sabbath.
Absolutely. And the usual slogan is first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
That's the more gentle
Yeah,
one.
that's the most, here, just in case you misunderstood.
What will happen first, right. And so on.
Right. And the funniest thing about this, by the way, that as I don't know if you remember, but the Reverend Tutu, who came from South Africa, the Archbishop Tutu came from South Africa to lecture Israel of its treatment of the Arabs in this country, and he was standing giving this lecture in Beit Sahur, which is a mostly Christian community, an Arab Christian community not far from Jerusalem, when this graffito was on the wall next to where he was standing, not realizing that the graffito saying we're going to kill the Christians as he was speaking against Israel.
I guess I want to ask you, for heaven's sake, won't the world ever throw off this Islamic menace?
I feel that the world is aware of the danger. It's just that it's treating it the way it treated the danger of Nazism in the 30s. They feel that they can appease it, that they can placate it, that they can be nice to it and thereby somehow vitiate its anger. But it won't work this way, and that is what I think the dangerous thing is. Not the lack of awareness of the danger, but the tactics which are used against it. And what I feel should be done is not only the realization of the danger, but also the very tough stance that has to be taken by the world against it. Otherwise, it will cause the kind of havoc that the totalitarian movements in the 30s caused. And that I'd hate to see.